Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Amir Bouakil. I'm here with Matt Izzardo from HBO.
Good afternoon.
Oh.
Thanks for sticking around. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Means a lot to see all you guys here. So
It's 5 o'clock, and I know we're the last thing between you and the casino floor. So we'll try and make sure you learn a lot before you go out and lose it all, or lose a lot of money out on the casino floor out there. So today we're going to talk about WarnerMedia, HBO's cloud-based linear playout system. We hope you'll be able to learn something from this that'll be of use in your own workflows that you're going to be working on. So a little bit about the agenda. We'll start with the cloud linear playout. Obviously, I'll explain what that is compared to other types of workflows you'll run into in the media entertainment business. We'll talk about, then I'll pass it over to Matt, and he'll tell you a little about himself, and then a little bit about HBO, WarnerMedia, and he'll tell you about their business problems. So what specifically the layman's problem that they were facing and what they were trying to solve with this technical solution. And we'll talk about WarnerMedia's playout architecture. So that includes 3 different phases. That includes their POC, where they tested out 3 vendors across 2 clouds. They'll talk about their actual initial architecture. After they picked a vendor, they'll talk about their business continuity plan architecture under HBO. And then, of course, this happened, as you're probably all aware in the industry, that there was a change in organization. AT&T acquired WarnerMedia, so there was a change in how things were done on the technical back end. So the final stage, there's going to be he'll talk about the 30-channel actual playout solution that they're using currently across Hudson Yards in Atlanta. And we'll talk about lessons learned, future plans, things that they wish not to do again or to wish to continue doing, and hopefully that'll inform your decisions going forward.
Amir, I don't want to trip you up, but just a quick correction. AT&T acquired Time Warner and then became WarnerMedia. So, and within the Time Warner umbrella, or under that umbrella, were 3 distinct entities: Warner Brothers, HBO, and Turner Broadcasting. So just to set the playing field, that was sort of the initial organization before we became WarnerMedia.
Thanks, man. No.
Yep, sure.
I do not wish to don't understand their internal organization. You know better than I do, for sure. Okay, and then so a little bit of myself real quickly. My name is Amir Bouakil. I am a senior cloud infrastructure architect with Amazon Web Services Professional Services Organization, which is it's an internal consulting arm of AWS. So obviously we're a part of sales enablement, so helping customers move workloads into the cloud. And obviously, as you could probably tell, I helped Matt and his organization out with building out the solution. So I'll start with a little bit about cloud linear playout, just to explain what it is. I'm sure most of you, if you're in the industry, you already know what that is, but I want to set a level playing field on what it is and explain what's going on here. So obviously, it's clear on the board, transmission of television channels to distributors and ultimate customers. So it's not B2C, so to speak, it's B2B. This is what we call the traditional way things were done. So the way you got Sesame Street before we move over to HBO, the way you watch CBS or ABC or any of the other big broadcasters, BBC, anything like that, you saw it this way. So it's fixed bit rate over traditional transmission protocols, mediums, satellite, so forth. What it isn't, what is not video on demand or OTT. This is not the vendors of the world like Netflix, Hulu, all the others, so even HBO now, this is just traditional transmission. The important steps that go on in linear playout, so management of assets, obviously it happens in any media workload. The scheduling of the assets, so that includes what's going to play, what promos, what advertisements, so forth that happen. Insertions of graphics, subtitles, and audio, of course, localization that has to happen, any captioning. Generation of final video, so whatever codec, whatever format that's being used by the distributor, and then also a reliable transmission system. So in this case, being sent to a satellite for uplink. So a little bit about the lifecycle segments, just to further explain it. So obviously glass to glass, you all heard that expression before. Still glass to glass if you're watching on your iPhone, so it's not plastic still. Acquisition, obviously, so studio or live acquisition. uplinked and then sent to wherever the DAM or MAM is going to sit. Of course, once it gets there, or even before that, it will be post-production editing. Any editing needs to be done, any manipulation of the files, and of course, after that, media supply chain. And of course, all those, there's really no straight line between those. They all, to some extent, can run amongst each other in different which ways and have different lines going in all sorts of ways, depending on what your organization is doing. Afterwards, it goes to publishing, and then it goes to one of two places, OTT, obviously, or linear playout distribution. And what we're going to talk about is obviously that top bit, that top right bit, linear playout and distribution. So a little bit about cloud-based playout, okay? The kind of the benefits you get from a cloud-based playout linear system. Most of you before are used to on-prem, so the traditional on-prem purveyors. Content, it allows you to focus on your actual job, which is producing watchable material. You're not in data center business. You don't want to be in that data center business. You want to focus on the content. You actually want to focus on that. Agility, it's a lot easier to spin down and spin up resources in AWS than it is on-prem. You don't have to go buy 10 racks, 15 racks of hardware. In AWS, you can hit a button and turn off all your EC2s or turn it back on. And if you're a more advanced user and you're using something like infrastructure as code, so CloudFormation, Pulumi, Terraform, any of the types of IAC resources, you can spin entire fleets of EC2s up, audit them, change them as you see fit, spin them back down, spin them back up later on, move on as you see fit. Maybe that a new generation of encoders come out, you can change it with one key change. Intelligence, there's obviously more analytics. There's more data you can reach in AWS. We have some built-in services. I mean, if you're doing management, say, CloudTrail, CloudWatch. There's a lot more vendors and partners in our ecosystem that allow you to ingest data, metadata particularly for your assets. If you're going to do some sort of media supply chain, it'll allow you to analyze the files. Maybe if you want to use some sort of ML workflow to categorize your files, that allows you to do that too. So there's a lot more opportunities there. Global reach. We're everywhere, and I always have to look at my notes on this because the region account keeps changing. So we're now in 22 regions, 4 announced regions. I think that's as of this week. The 4 announced regions are this week's 210 points of presence. That includes Cloud Edge, so forth. Edge. We're in 245 countries, and then of course, if you've probably heard recently, released local zones. So currently in LA. So LA is obviously a place where a lot of media workloads are. So you'll be able to run a lot more latency sensitive workloads out there. So you're able to spin something up quickly, closer to your customers, and then if you don't need to use it, or if your customers move, or they're not interested in that, you can spin it back down. And then finally, cost savings. You only spend what you need. It becomes OpEx versus CapEx. The bean counters obviously love that more because it's more predictable for them. They can decide how they want to deal with that. You know, if they're willing to spend a few thousand more per month as opposed to 5 million or 6 million at one lump sum. They're not sure what they're going to get, 2 or 3 years down the road. They're more hesitant about that sort of spend. So the platform has a lot of different options for you to work through if you're going to use for media services. You can use some of our core services. So that includes Elemental Services, Media Connect, Media Live, Media Store. You can use AWS ThinkBox, CloudFront, and as I said, local zones now. We have a large partner ecosystem. We're actually going to talk about one of those partners today, Evertz. And of course, there's custom. You can build your own. Encourage that too. Please, by all means, if you need to build something, you can build it quite easily in AWS. We have SDKs in multiple languages for you to use. And then, of course, the core services, the thing that built AWS to begin with. So EC2, S3, everyone loves S3, Glacier, and it keeps growing every day. And then the key one, of course, at the end on the bottom right is one that will become more important to you. particularly as you try and reach your audience and categorize and catalog your data, AI and ML services. Just a little bit about legacy hardware, and just to hit the point home on how things currently work. Right up here we have a sample architecture for Harmonic, which incidentally is also what was used by HBO previously when they on their previous system. So this diagram represents single channel air chain. Each of the 64 icons represents a device. Hundreds of thousands of dollars in capital investment. I mean, it's incredible the amount of money you spend on it. And of course, you don't know when you build this and you're running this, if you make a mistake or if audience tastes change, this is useless. And in HBO's case, you'll find out too, they're moving. It has to be geo agnostic. You're going to find out that if this is sitting in one place, you're going to have to move it someplace else. It becomes a bear. It takes months to deploy. Requires lots of men, lots of women, lots of resources to maintain. And exiting equipment at the end can be a bear too. When the life cycle's over for this. So their current one ended after about 5 or 6 years, and so they had to refresh, and that's what led to this deployment. So with that, I'll turn over to Matt, and he'll explain a bit more about what WarnerMedia was trying to do and what they're trying to solve.
Thanks, Amir. So once again, I'm Matt Azzardo, Director of Media Technology at HBO, and now working across WarnerMedia. Just to level set what's under WarnerMedia, the brands that are under WarnerMedia now include the legacy Turner brands, HBO and Cinemax, and Warner Brothers, as I mentioned. So in the linear playout domain, the channel count went from what was initially HBO and Cinemax 30 channels up to a potential pool of, I think it's double that maybe. I don't even know the number off the top of my head, but it includes TBS, TNT, Cartoon Network, Boomerang, TCM, CNN, HLN. I know I'm missing something.
All of them.
But a lot of channels, right? So I think we're well positioned. But I look at this slide and I say, what's WarnerMedia's business problem? That's a loaded statement. What I want to focus on here is obviously the linear playout. And while there is a lot of press and focus around HBO Max and the launch of that in 2020, which we're very excited about, and in many ways we'll share the source content to a large degree, this is about the linear playout model and taking that to the cloud and working with AWS. So you still have to pay through TV Everywhere model for HBO Go. That still exists. Linear will be around for quite some time, as will satellite. I think, as you've seen probably throughout this conference and many previous, there's an evolution there towards streaming services, and there's exponential growth in that domain. But what we're focusing on here is maintaining that revenue stream of the linear playout with the traditional big screen, which still generates a good portion of revenue for the company, and we have thousands and thousands of subscribers and over 900 affiliates domestic US, which are taking our satellite feeds today. A little bit about myself. I started in this business, very lucky, and I'm lucky to be here talking to you today about this. I'm very fortunate. I started at Bell Labs working in systems testing software, and working on early stages of HD. So I'm dating myself a little bit. But so I started there and then went over to NBC, where I worked as a systems engineer for 10 years, and then up into management, where I managed teams that were responsible for supporting not only linear, but nonlinear distribution of content, the early days of EST, electronic sell-through, and building out transcode farms on-prem, which actually still exist in some degrees, or in some areas. And then also at NBC, I learned a lot about transmission and worked with a transmission team. I worked at both 30 Rock, supporting NBC Network and news, and then went over to the cable knock in Inglewood Cliffs. Lived through the Comcast merger, joint venture, whatever you want to call it, acquisition, and learned a lot about changing business cultures and maintaining an agile approach towards distributing content of the highest quality. And then from there, I went on to Akamai to work on OTT, streaming side of the business, and built out a broadcast operation control center there, which was really to sort of bridge the gap between traditional content providers like NBC, ABC, Turner, Fox, and give them some insights into what happens inside the CDN. So I learned a lot about streaming distribution and getting analytics out of the CDN and providing that back to the customers. And then I was fortunate enough to get an opportunity at HBO, so I came back to New York and joined the HBO team, where I was largely working on strategy, which was really what brought me to this project. And my boss at the time, Stefan Petrat, had a vision with the team there, with the leadership team, Diane Trineski, and working towards migrating things to the cloud. So just quickly, before I dive into this stuff, quick show of hands, how many people here watch HBO? That's good. How many on linear? Traditional cable?
Sometimes.
How about streaming? There you go. I think the pendulum has swung. So let's get into it. The previous system we had 30 channels, as I mentioned, across HBO and Cinemax. Legacy hardware, we were running Harmonic Omnion servers that were purchased and integrated circa 2012, 2014. There's some HBO people in the room here who can keep me honest. Before I joined HBO. And we were running MPEG-2 MXF format, what we called internally ProX, which was the profile that we use. So we wanted to see what we could do to refresh that and or move to the cloud. So the forcing function was exactly that. Do you refresh or do you look at a different model? Something that's a little bit more future-proof, something that gives us a little bit more flexibility, as Amir was saying earlier. And then we got to look at the costs. And my mandate from my boss at the time was literally, we should not need any boxes for this. Unfortunately, there were a few boxes along the way, but I think I kept that mantra of we should not need any boxes for this, and really push us to try to do this in a virtual way. So what are the benefits and why do it? We took an initial look at cloud services maturing. So I got to know the folks at AWS and other cloud providers, which I won't mention, but got to know some folks there. Got to see how services are maturing for media. I mean, I'm not going to go too much cheerleading AWS here, but they do have a lot of services available, as you can see. And just from this week, the announcements and the services they're launching, it's stunning. And when AWS acquired Elemental, I thought that was a strong play strategically for video and for media and entertainment. HBO was an Elemental customer, and also when I came in, already working with AWS. So geodiversity was something we were interested in, knowing that the business was going to change, and also looked at a CapEx versus OpEx model. So I did a lot of early analysis on cost, total cost of ownership. That was like a hot term for a while, looking at what it's going to cost us to maintain this stuff over time. So let's take a look at the playout architecture. As Amir mentioned, we had sort of 3 stages to this project. I'm going to take you through the POC phase, then stage 2, that stage 1. Stage 2 is the BCP solution for HBO, and then stage 3 is what I call the X-Chain plus BCP. It's sort of a multi-purpose model. So we had 3 vendors. I took a real kind of academic approach towards this. In the beginning, I wrote this requirements document that was probably 20-something pages long.
25.
25, sorry. Thanks for reading it. So yeah, and I gave that to the vendors. It was kind of like an RFP or an RFI, right? Look at what we wanted to achieve both operationally and technically. We started out with just 2 channels, and I gotta say, all the vendors were very kind. This didn't cost us anything in the beginning. My boss was very surprised that we were able to do this, partnering with these vendors, and both the cloud providers and the playout automation and software providers were very forthcoming and willing to test. So that was exciting. The 3 components, or 3 or 4 components mapped out here. There's the cloud piece, where you're gonna build out your storage and your VPC and sort of host it. Then there was the transport, there's the playout automation, which is really the key engine that's running the machine, or running the playout machine. So what automation system we're gonna use, and then how does that integrate with your operation? Transport to site or to affiliate or to wherever you wanna go. We used a couple different vendors there, just to get vendor diversity. And then the decode at the affiliate, quote unquote, which is the IRD, which we have thousands deployed today. So we wanted to have interoperability with our install base of IRDs. So what I did in that POC, or within this initial phase, was to set the requirements. That we had some KPIs, things that we had to achieve, things that had to work. On the operational side of things, the ability to deal with breakaway lists, appending lists, missing content, primary backup switching, editing events, secondary events, tally, sort of your traditional things that you need in an operations, in a master control environment, so that folks can run the system effectively and with high availability and reliability. Also needed watermarking, SCSI triggers, AFD. We rely on aspect format descriptor to do the SD down convert at the edge. HBO was going through a project at the time to eliminate SD transmissions so we could reduce feeds to save cost, as you would imagine. So we need to support that. Bunch of data in the bank, XDS data, vChip, et cetera, captioning. And then the things listed at the bottom that were sort of tough things, or things that didn't work right out of the gates for all the vendors. We had some issues with the automation for one of the vendors. And live events still is something that's sort of an outlier, that we're looking at how we deal with live events in the cloud. And you probably already heard this week, there were several presentations on that. It's a hot topic. Solving live in a cloud environment is not easy. So we're still looking at that. And then some future formats like HEVC, H.265, and how we want to look at some future proofing of the system. This next slide just shows the basic network architecture. We had a sort of a typical Cisco stack, 2K, 5K, 7K, Palo Alto firewalls. We just segmented the local VLANs so that we had some delineation between the traffic, the multicast traffic on site, and it was easier to manage in this way. So what were the results? They were all pretty well suited for cloud, which was nice to see. I will say I did this over a period of like 6+ months, so we ran this for a long time. Video quality is excellent, and I see that the solutions were really sort of maturing and there. In the end, what the final sort of delineation for us was partnering with AWS and working with Evertz. So they had the tightest integration with our on-prem solution. So we built out sort of a hybrid model because luckily Turner, well, it wasn't luck, but I kind of knew that Turner was heavy into using Evertz on-prem. HBO was pretty heavy Evertz shop. So building a hybrid model had the least amount of impedance, I would say, as we moved forward. And I have to say, from a collaboration standpoint, while we have ongoing work we do with Evertz across a multitude of their product set, they're very good at sort of getting in the trenches with us, coming down into our next-gen master control and working with us sort of hand in hand. And AWS as well. So we've had a lot of support from AWS throughout this process. At one point, we actually had office hours where AWS solutions architects would come on site once a week. They'd have book times, almost like something out of school. Where you could go in, you could ask questions. If you had ideas or things you were trying to solve, they were there to help us. Admittedly, we're a big customer, but I would encourage you to sort of reach out to your solutions architects and ask them, ask them to be there and collaborate with you and ask them to help solve the problems that you're trying to solve. So this was the original 8-channel model, highly redundant. Some would say maybe overbuilt or over-designed. It was 8 channels, primary and backup, across 2 regions. In each region, we had 3 AZs, and we had failover between channels within the region, as well as the ability to switch between US East 1 and US East 2. Direct connect out to multiple sites. So the WarnerMedia sites, we have and still do have the Campbellton Road Earth Station Crest down in Atlanta, which is an unmanned facility today, where the legacy HBO DR was, and that's still a viable location for us. Techwood, which is the Atlanta campus, Northwest Atlanta, where Turner got started and where CNN got started. And then there's CNN Center, there's Hudson Yards in that original model. Hudson Yards based out in New York. It's our new facility where all of the WarnerMedia brands are now co-located in 30 Hudson Yards. And I'll encourage you to, if you have any questions as we go along, just feel free at the end to step up and ask. I know I'm covering a lot here, but it would be nice to see some questions at the end as we're going through this. So the acquisition actually happened right as I was trying to deploy this. So it was an interesting business challenge internally. I had to resell this and repitch it multiple times. So I don't know if any of you have had to do that, but that's, as an engineer, that's an interesting skill to learn. But it was a good exercise, and an exercise in persistence and really kind of honing what we wanted to achieve for the company and for the business. So the locations over on the left, CNN Center and Next Gen Master Control, which is based in Techwood campus. They're about, I don't know, it's like a 10-minute drive, a few miles apart. CNN Center is largely where as you would imagine, they have the news studios, and there's a lot of post-production and news edit there. And they were also the CNN Espanol is in that facility. It's right next to the Omni Hotel. And then we have Techwood, which is the Northwest campus, which is where the master control is located. And now where we actually do our uplink out of the backyard of Techwood. Hudson Yards, that is primarily for this solution, it's primarily a BCP path, so business continuity planning. If there's an issue in Atlanta and we need to continue to distribute our content to affiliates, we took a subset of the 30 channels, and as I'll get into, we take that through Hudson Yards to an uplink teleport, so an occasional use teleport. And then the hot dog facility, which is no longer there, it's sad to say. It was shut down just in the last month or so. Fine facility in operation for, I don't know, how many years, Benazir? 40 years. 40 years. And a fine team there. And that's where I got started with the organization and a lot of HBO folks. That was the original sort of linear operations center where we had a TOC and a NOC, and we had bunch of edit facilities there as well. So that's all that functionality has been migrated to Atlanta and Hudson Yards as part of the the WarnerMedia initiative. And all I would say here is this forced us to redeploy the solution. So I had this 8-channel BCP solution where we deployed it in AWS. We had that high availability model with all that redundancy. When WarnerMedia, when we became WarnerMedia, I went down to Atlanta and we were asked to redeploy that in another AWS account. Looks like we lost the slide there.
Yeah. Computer.
Using infrastructure as code, were you able to redeploy that using some of the AWS tools to manage that, or
So,
re-engineer it?
good question. So the question, were we able to use infrastructure as code and do a redeploy? Essentially, what we did when we launched it initially is we had CloudFormation templates, and we had the sort of, I think it was 40 YAML files that we worked with originally. And then I worked with Karen Manning and the cloud architecture team under Don Browning at WarnerMedia. They were previously Turner folks. And they were able to sort of scrub those YAML files and create something that we could redeploy in a fairly timely manner. What initially took, say, it was about 15 working days to deploy that, and we were able to do it again the second time around in just about the same amount of time. So I joke in some ways it took me longer to execute the purchase and get it approved than it took us to actually deploy the system. So I mean, that speaks to the repeatability and sort of the ease, and also having a great cloud architecture team internally helps. And they did a fantastic job documenting everything and working with AWS to make sure that we were doing the right thing. So what is the final architecture? Here we are at stage 3. This is our 30-channel model. You'll see over on the right there, 10 channels per AZ. The 3 sites, the 3 sites over on the left, upper left-hand corner, Next-Gen Master Control, CNN Center, Atlanta, and then Hudson Yards. So let's take the life cycle of a file. Let's pick a show. Who's got a favorite HBO show?
Game of Thrones.
Silicon Valley. I love that show. They nailed it. I'm addicted to that show. So we get a finished episode of Silicon Valley. It gets QC'd in Atlanta, right? So we take that master file. It's transcoded to what we call a Pro 42, 41. We started with Pro 41. I didn't know if it was Pro 42. That's an ABC1 high profile 5.0 35 megabit file that then becomes our air master. Once that's been cleared for air, it gets uploaded via Spera to S3. We store all our master files in S3. And I'm sure we're going to do more with tagging and tiered storage as some of these new features evolve for S3, which is a fantastic storage medium. And then the schedule also gets uploaded. It gets registered in Mediator and Playtime, which is the playlist, which I'll show you later on. And that schedule is usually a couple days out. The one nice thing about HBO, Cinemax, the schedule is pretty well set. We do swap out promos, but compared to what I saw in my NBC days and some other networks, HBO is pretty well scheduled. So inside the AZ, it's largely the Evertz components sized on the right EC2. So in a lot of ways, it's a lift and shift of the on-prem setup. You got to do some sizing of your EC2s to make sure you have the right level of compute. And we had to do some things with UDP repeaters, and we do some things with monitoring in the cloud. But we don't really unpack the Evertz software too much and leverage as much of AWS as I think we could. There's Evertz IO, which we use for doing the proxies in the clouds, and that's a Lambda function, which is used on demand. So if we want to create local proxies to view within Mediator, the UI, that's kind of done on an as-needed basis, where previously we were doing it with RenderX, sort of purpose-built boxes. Mediator core automation, that all gets played back out via CloudBridge, which is Evertz's proprietary transmit protocol, or their transport protocol, which is similar to a ZXE or a RIST or SRT, excuse me. And we were working on maybe getting some other interoperability going there, but we started with CloudBridge. CloudBridge basically bookends that direct connect. So you have a cloud, and it handles your FEC. So if you're dropping packets in the transport out of the cloud to site, CloudBridge handles that for you. So it's seamless, and you have good video quality when you get to site. We unpacked the video. We're fully 2110 in Atlanta and in Hudson Yards, which is the largest, I've been told, the largest SMPTE 2110 production facility in the country. And then we route it through the facility, and then it gets compressed for uplink, and we turn an SPTS, or single program transport stream, into a multi-program transport stream using Harris and Aris and Harmonic for our compression vendors. And then it goes out to affiliates. So a couple more slides, and then we'll get into a summary, and then I'll show you some brief things on the screen just to show you it's real. But what I want to highlight here is it's a little bit of a busy slide, but if you just focus on the vertical stack of ORTs in the center there, ORT is short for Overture. It's the Evertz software product. We have multiple paths to air. So we have an A chain out of Techwood. That's a physical box. We have a C chain out of CNN. And then we created what I call the X chain. Don't ask me why it's A, C, and X. Well, I can tell you why. But for the other networks, it's A, B, and C, right? Which would be logical, right? But as we went through the acquisition process and the deployment of the HBO channels in Atlanta, there was a business decision to only do an A and a C. So that actually played into my favor of pitching this project. So I said, don't we need a third path like we have for all the other channels? And they said yes. So hence the X chain. We decided to keep the BCP solution because we still need that, right? If we have what we call an Atlanta smoking hole scenario, people need to get out of the building. There's a threat to CNN, and we got to get out of the building. We want to transmit from an alternate location. We can go through Hudson Yards. The other thing I'll mention here is we came up with the concept of egress on demand, if you will, sort of an egress valve. This was our own solution that we worked on with Evertz, and we came up with the concept of an ignite button, an extinguish button. It's basically an on-off toggle where an operator can go in. We don't have to egress all the time, is the gist of it, right? Because you're going to pay for egress. And everybody kept asking me, how much is this going to cost if I'm egressing 24/7, 35 megabits per second per channel? Do the math, right? It adds up. So I went back and said, I really want to do this. I don't want to lose traction on this. How could we solve this problem? Well, we could use it as needed. Like have it running in the cloud, monitor it in the cloud, make sure it's there, and when you need it, just open the valve. So we worked with Evertz and their Magnum SDVN routing. We basically took the concept. When I was working back at NBC, I was thinking, when we transmit to satellite, we have redundant paths, and when we had the backup path transmits into dummy load. It's the same kind of concept. Instead of transmitting out, just transmit into a bit bucket, don't egress, leave it there, make sure it's good, and then when you need it, turn it on. So there is latency there, obviously, and there's delay, but the business was actually okay with that, because if you're taking this X path, something bad is happening, right? So you lost your A and your C, 10 seconds or 15 seconds to get that video flowing, is acceptable. That's sort of the decision we came to. And the other thing I want to mention here is the ACO. So there's an auto changeover switch that we have. The ability to sort of auto switch between the signals is also there. And then one of the other kind of unique thing we did as part of this project, because HBO has multiple audio tracks in that master file, we transmit 2-channel 5.1 and then 2-channel secondary language. We want to dynamically switch between those audio payloads. And we do that using audio metadata, and that gets handled by that 7814 card over on the left before you go out to compression and uplink. So lessons learned, future plans, security. Some folks from the security team are here in the room. I will just say, engage your security team early and often. Make sure you're doing things in accordance with what they require. It's sort of an interesting time in the business for us. The security teams were evolving as we were evolving. And we do work with some security third-party software, right? I don't want to name names, but we do have some things monitoring. We actually went through a security audit as part of this process initially under HBO, and it was first HBO solution. We had a third-party company called Sword and Shield came in and audited our environment. I didn't know what a pen test was, but now I know what a pen test is. That was a fun couple of weeks. But really to make sure that you're doing things in a way where you're not going to put the content at risk, right? People say content is king. I do believe content is king. But if content is king, distribution is queen. I think you need them both. But you need to make sure that content is secure. Finance. I'm not a finance person, but I got to know my finance people very well. Build a financial model for yourself. Use the AWS calculator. Build your own, mega spreadsheet that's got the formulas built in. I used it as recently as this morning, as I was meeting with my AWS account manager to do some budgeting and projections. You will need that throughout the entire process. I've used that repeatedly, and knowing what the cost is going to be, it puts some people's mind at ease, but also it helps you just get through the process a little bit easier. And also figure out whether you want to go OpEx versus CapEx. I actually put together 2 models and I presented them to the business. That pendulum swings for the business, right? Sometimes it's better to do it as CapEx, just get that money out the door, spend it. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes you want to have a monthly run rate and be able to project what that monthly run rate is. So I learned a lot about the business side of things, the financial side of things doing this. And as I joked before, it took longer to buy it than it did to build it. And then test. I can't say enough about test. As I said, my first job in this industry was testing software and doing system verification at Bell Labs. We tested every day. I went in, I was fortunate at HBO to have a little lab in the basement there with a couple racks, and I was able to monitor things and work with the IT folks on monitoring things. And again, the vendors were very forthcoming with software to monitor. We used InioQuest to look at video quality and video clarity, looking at the video once we brought it back. I'll mention a couple other vendors we went through. Datadog, Turbonomics, a couple other really helpful tools to monitor your environment and see how it's performing. Today we use Cloud Health and Cloud Checker, and I literally check those every day. I go in the morning, grab a cup of coffee, pull up the streams, look at what we're doing, and see what the latest activity in the environment is, and really know how you're performing. Sorry. So future plans. We have high hopes for the system. I have high hopes for its performance. Looking at flex channel, one of the things that was presented with early on was enable the business to think about things in a different way, right? What are flex channels? Suppose you wanted to spin up a channel for an internal marketing campaign, or you wanted to put together a channel for some strategic initiative. Maybe it's only for 6 months, and then you want to spin it back down. Now we can do that. We're also looking at StatMux. I did this entire same process with my compression vendors. This was before the acquisition, but I've sort of done my homework in that space. I did the same methodology. I wrote an RFP, a requirements document, had multiple vendors, looked at all the virtualized compression. Be happy to talk to you about that. There's some good candidates out there, and that is also maturing. So how do you take that single program transport stream, turn it into a MUX, a statistical multiplexed multi-program transport stream, make it look like a satellite transmission, and maybe you hand it off directly, right? That's that VPC handoff. We could use entitlements. We could use Media Connect, which I've also tested. And you could take that bundle, that bouquet of channels, and hand it off to those big MVPDs that are taking your satellite feed. And maybe you do it in a dual model or hybrid model for a while. It gives you some flexibility to maybe shed some transponders if you want, or move things around. People love moving stuff around these days. And then live events, as I mentioned earlier. Live is tricky. I did test live in the POC. I know I can do it. I know we can do it. There are some challenges with latency and if you're going to do a live production through a PCR or an ICR, or if you're going to go direct from venue to cloud. Like, technically you can do it. How you want to switch it in and out and how clean it is. Do you have your PTP driving your cloud system properly so that you can do frame accurately switch video? Yes, you can do that. So it's possible. It's just a lot of this, again, is also getting people's mindsets to change too, which you'll find as you go down this journey. That's why I mentioned earlier about having to sell it and resell it and pitch it and repitch it. And here I am today pitching it again. You have to do that in order to get people to think that this is real and it can actually happen, because we've had dozens of years of on-prem heavy metal infrastructure that has served the business very well. And moving away from that creates anxiety for some people. So let me summarize real quick, and then we'll jump in. I just want to show you on the screen, like I said, what we have running. Key takeaways, I've mentioned this a couple times, but the purchase and the deployment. We had a compressed project timeline in the last phase of this. So once we became WarnerMedia, I'll never forget the day I walked into that conference room in Atlanta, and my boss said, "You think you could redeploy that?" I said, "Really? I just got it working." He said, and I said, sure we could do that. And he goes, "How long is it going to take you?" And I said, 4 weeks. We maybe were a little bit longer, but like the actual deployment, doing the actual CFTs and deploying it, I think was done within the 4 weeks. But there's a lot of stuff around the monitoring and really fine-tuning the system that we've done. And as you've heard from folks like Andy Jassy throughout this week, and I heard him speak this morning, like, it's a constant refinement. You're constantly tweaking as you deploy. And that's kind of the fun thing about it. If you're into doing this stuff, it can be, you can really sort of optimize things and tweak them as you go, and constantly learning as well. There's various options for monitoring, which I like. So I can sit in my office in Hudson Yards and I can monitor this stuff. That's really cool. I think you have to be able to monitor it and measure it if you're going to control it. And if you want it to be good, you need to be monitoring it. Now, even though it's in the cloud, it shouldn't matter. It should feel like it's right there. And in a lot of ways, we have a lot of visibility into the system, not only through the other software vendors, but straight through AWS as well. CloudWatch, CloudTrail, and through the console, we can see what's happening. It was a multi-purpose design, which I'm kind of psyched about. We kept the BCP portion of it. We created this X chain. Who knows what else we'll build on top? Maybe we'll come up with, like I said, these flex channels, or maybe we'll do some real interesting things with live. One of the challenges we have ahead of us is, beyond the HBO Cinemax channels, how do we do CNN on this system? Right? So they've challenged me with that one. I don't have all the answers, but I'm happy to go down that journey with AWS and Eberts. And then, like I said, we were able to minimize the egress costs with this, what I call egress valve, which is the ability to toggle it on and off. And like I said, when I come in the morning, I check my cloud health system, and I showed Amir this earlier before we came in. I can tell you exactly what I'm spending, which is powerful. And can be scary, but it's also powerful. So you want to know, you have the ability to throttle that and control it, right? So lastly, I want to thank you all for taking the time to listen.